Hey everybody, welcome to the videos for lineup building for Week 20, Conference Championship weekend of the NFL season over on Draftkings, and more so focus on cash game roster construction. Now, a couple things before I start this video. Number one, the purpose of this is not for me to build you guys a lineup for you to use in all of your contests. You have to be able to think for yourselves and build your own lineups. Because I'm not even sure what these are going to look like yet. I'm building on the fly with you guys, but you can apply my own strategy to your own favorite plays and build your own lineups. And if you find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out, and I really do appreciate it. And while you're at it, you might as well hit that notification bell as well, so you don't miss out whenever I post new content. And YouTube tells me around 50% of the people who watch these videos have not yet subscribed. So if you're a frequent visitor to the channel, or if you're just new and like what you see, consider that subscribe button because it really helps the channel grow, and that's obviously going to help me out as well. And if you want to follow me over on social media, the handle is in the bottom right corner of your screen. And if you want to help support the channel over on Patreon, link is down below for that. You get access to the Discord chat, cheat sheet, notes, projections, all that fun stuff. I do cover other sports as well. And I think that's it for the shameless plug. So without further ado, let's dive into today's video. Alright, so if you guys have been watching my videos for quite some time, I typically like to start with the running back position, especially in cash games, but it's only a 2-game slate, so we're going to do things a little bit different here. But the plan for this video is to make a couple of lineups here featuring either Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen, as those are my favorite quarterbacks to use on this slate. I also like Aaron Rodgers. I was contemplating doing a lineup with him, but I'm going to leave him out here just so we don't take too long going over too many lineups. I still think he's a fine option, but I do plan on using the Buccaneers defense the most just because they're cheap. They actually have a decent defense. They definitely have the best defense amongst the teams that are remaining, but I don't really want to use any of these defenses. Unfortunately, we do, so we might as well just take the cheaper option with at least a pretty solid defense, although I know it's on the road in Lambeau Field. Might be snowing. Aaron Rodgers, I don't think they're going to do that great, but again, we have to pick someone, so that's kind of the reasoning of not using Aaron Rodgers in this video, but I still think he's a fine option. I still like some Green Bay offensive pieces like Aaron Jones, Devante Adams, and Robert Tonyan. But anyway, before I get too much into that, let's start building with a Josh Allen lineup. And we're going to try to do like 2 to 3 lineups here. We'll mix and match some skill position players as well, but we'll try to correlate our lineups as best as possible. So let's start with the Josh Allen build. I think he's my favorite quarterback to use on the slate. Obviously, I like Patrick Mahomes, and I would say I have him projected higher than Josh Allen. But when you factor in the price tag being below $7,000 in a game that should be an absolute shootout, this game features a 54.5-point over-under. Pretty tight spread as well. The Bills are 3.5-point dogs here, so it should be a back-and-forth shootout. But if the Bills are trailing in this game, if they go down, happen to be down like 2 scores, I mean, Josh Allen should have a monster game if he's playing catch-up. He's got Stephon Diggs, one of the offensive weapons in football this season. So, yeah, I definitely like Josh Allen here. I know he had a pretty bad game last week, fantasy-wise. Only had 12.5 fantasy points versus the Baltimore Ravens. Pretty tough matchup. Things get a bit easier here versus the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, they don't have an awful defense by any means, but they're more so mid-pack versus the pass. But they have been bottom 10 versus quarterbacks this season, and Josh Allen's been one of the best quarterbacks in football. He's playing like an MVP this year. Unfortunately, he's not going to be able to pass Aaron Rodgers or Patrick Mahomes this year, but I think you can make a very strong argument for Josh Allen being the 3rd best quarterback in football this season. He's just been absolutely phenomenal. Close to 300 yards passing per game, a 70% completion percentage, about 30 rushing yards, and half a rushing touchdown per game. Dual threat quarterback below $7,000. I will take that any day of the week in a game that should be an absolute shootout. Now, he didn't have the best game in the world week 6 versus the Kansas City Chiefs way early on in the season. I believe he only had 16 fantasy points versus them. Only had 122 passing yards. Still had 40 yards on the ground, but wasn't an overall great day. But it's the playoffs. Things are going to be amped up, and I think Josh Allen should be able to easily pay off that price point of $6,900. I feel like he is just way too cheap. I do realize DraftKings does have to make the pricing just a little bit different. I feel like this was a regular main slate. Josh Allen's not going to be below $7,000. They have to make it a little bit easier to make lineups, but yeah, I just feel like he is way too cheap, and he could certainly be the best point per dollar option on the site at his position. So we're going to plug him in for this build. And if we're using Josh Allen, we have to use his #1 wideout, and that's Stephon Diggs here at $7,000. And he too, I feel like he is just way too cheap for how great he's been all season long. Even if he's in bad matchups, the guy still pays off. He's not had a game below double-digit points all season long. He's the only wide receiver that you can save that for. And last week versus Baltimore, very tough matchup. Started 11 targets, 8 catches, over 100 yards, got into the end zone, good for nearly 30 DraftKings points. And the guy's just been a model consistency all season long. And like Josh Allen back in week 6, obviously Josh Allen had a bit of a down game fantasy points-wise. Stephon Diggs would have as well. But again, he still had double-digit points in that game. Had 8 targets, 6 catches, 46 yards. A pretty pedestrian game, but he still got into the end zone, good for 16.6 points. And the Chiefs are allowing the second fewest points per game to the wide receiver position. But again, Stephon Diggs has just been impossible to guard this season, and he should get 10 plus targets here, especially if the Bills happen to be trailing. He could push for 15 targets, and would not be surprised if he gets over 100 plus yards and finds the end zone once or twice in this game. And at $7,000, I feel like he is a little bit too cheap here. So we'll plug in Stephon Diggs, and that would give us $5,100 left per player. So we could either start using some running backs, or we could go to the tight end position, plug in Travis Kelce if we so choose to do so in this lineup, which I think we can. So instead of working on running backs first, I do want to plug in Travis Kelce. Now, I don't think he's an absolute lock must play, but he is just so much better than everybody else at the position here. Like, it's Kelce, then you go right down to Robert Tonyan, Gronkowski, Cameron Brate, Dawson Knox. Like, he is by far the best play at his position. And I know there's a lot of good wide receivers on this slate, but you can make a case for Devante Adams, Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs all being the wide receiver one on this slate. But there is no argument to be made at the tight end position. It's obviously Travis Kelce. So if you just want to lock up the best guy at the position, you can plug in Travis Kelce here. It's also a pretty good matchup versus the Buffalo Bills. They've been bottom 5 this season versus tight ends in terms of fantasy points allowed per game to the position. And the guy is just an absolute lock for nearly 20 plus points every single week. If we're just looking at the past 4 games on the screen here, 27, 22, 22, 30, usually going to get into the end zone, should see close to 10 targets, probably going to get around 100 yards, and more than likely he's going to find the end zone. Now, his matchup versus Buffalo all the way back in week 6 this year had 65 yards, 7 targets, 5 catches, did not get into the end zone, still had 22.5 fantasy points. Did have 2 touchdowns and had 22.5 fantasy points, and it's just impossible to guard this guy. And I think Tre'Davious White should be able to be on Tyreek Hill for a good portion of this game. Not saying Tyreek Hill is going to get absolutely shut down by any means. He usually is going to get there, should get around 100 yards and get to the end zone. He actually is cheaper than Travis Kelce, but I do like Travis Kelce's chances of getting to the end zone once or twice. He should have 100 yards, and again, he's just by far the best play at his position. I know Robert Tonyan has been a touchdown scoring machine this season, but even then, if he doesn't score the touchdown, he's averaging around 30 yards receiving this season. Meanwhile, Travis Kelce is at around 100 yards. So definitely the best play at his position. We're going to plug him in on this lineup. So when we do that, we have about $4,600 left per player. So I think we should probably try to find a running back, because I don't want to get stuck with using guys like Jamal Williams or Le'Veon Bell, which is just not going to happen here. So we kind of have Aaron Jones and everybody else, and he's $1,200 more expensive than everybody. And it's not like a Travis Kelce situation, because Aaron Jones is not, the drop off from Aaron Jones to Leonard Fournette is not like Travis Kelce to Robert Tonyan or Cameron Brate or anything like that. Like, Leonard Fournette could easily outscore Aaron Jones on the slate. I would not be that surprised. But Aaron Jones, I definitely think it's not by far, but he's easily the best play at his position here. So if we can afford him, I would not mind getting it. Now, I don't like the matchup here versus Tampa Bay. They're one of the best defenses in football versus running backs this year. They're allowing the, I believe it's I forget the exact number, but they're allowing the fewest, second fewest, or the third fewest points per game to the running back position. But the one thing they have struggled at this season is allowing receptions to running backs. And we know Aaron Jones is a capable pass catcher. It's not like he's Alvin Kamara here where he's going to get like 10 plus targets in a game. If you're looking at the past few weeks, 2, 5, 3, 4, it's nothing crazy, but it is a nice floor for him. If they can't get anything going on the ground, they can get him some dump offs. They can definitely do some damage through the air. And his volume is never like super consistent. Like, we know he's going to get around 15 to 20 total touches, but there's always a little bit too much Jamal Williams and AJ Dillon I see on the field for my comfort. It just makes me a little, it just sucks when you're roster Aaron Jones and you see someone else on the field, because he's the best running back on the team. But when you see other guys getting carries, it's infuriating. It happens every week, so it's just something you have to mentally prepare for. You just kind of have to hope that he gets in goal line work, because if that's the case, I like his chances of finding the end zone. And it should be a pretty solid play at $6,500. Despite the tough matchup, the Packers have a team total close to 30 in this one. They're home favorites at Lambeau Field, so it also might be snowing in this game, which could be a boost for the run game. I don't think it's going to affect the offenses too much, because it's not supposed to be too windy, but again, could help the run game here. So Aaron Jones at $6,500, we will plug him in. He's pretty consistent for the most part. Now, the volume, not like elite level, but he can be pretty efficient with his touches. And since we paid up for Aaron Jones, we're going to need a cheaper running back. Because if we plug in Fournette, not saying he's super expensive, but if we plug him in, that's going to leave us $4,000 left, which I guess could work if we get down to a cheap wide receiver, maybe like Scotty Miller. But just to make things a little bit easier for right now, we can save $800 and use Devin Singletary here at $4,500. Now, he definitely busted last week versus the Baltimore Ravens. Keep in mind it was a pretty tough matchup, but the volume wasn't that great. He only had 7 carries in that game, 3 targets, good for 10 total opportunities, but only had 6.7 fantasy points, didn't find the end zone, so it was a pretty disappointing day. And I had higher expectations with Zach Moss being out. Zach Moss is once again going to be out, obviously, so Devin Singletary is still going to be the lead back. He did play the majority of the snaps and to get the majority of the touches. I know TJ Yeldon got a couple of touches, but it wasn't anything too crazy. But this is actually a pretty good matchup on the ground versus the Kansas City Chiefs. They are one of the worst run defenses in football. I believe they're allowing I think they're bottom 10 team defensively versus running backs in terms of fantasy points per game given out to the position. They're also bottom 5 DVA run defense. So Singletary might find some success here on the ground. I'm not saying he's a fantastic running back or anything, but at that price point, being the lead back, he should get a couple of targets as well, especially if they're trailing and he gets a couple of dump offs. I like his chances of being able to pay off his $4,500 price point. I know they said the same thing last week versus the Ravens, but we do have limited options here, and we need value, so $4,500 for the RB1 and a pretty darn good offense. We'll take it in a good matchup versus the Chiefs. And it's not even a bad correlation play with Josh Allen. Again, we can't get too picky because it's only a 2-game slate, but he should throw the ball to Singletary, and a passing touchdown to Singletary is not out of the equation here. So we have $4,200 left per player. And I mentioned earlier I do like the Buccaneers defense, so we might as well just plug them in just to see what we're working with here. Because like the other defenses on the slate, just to make the case for the Buccaneers, do you really want to play the Bills versus the Patrick Mahomes? Do you really want to play the Chiefs versus the Bills, which I have a lot of Bills in here. I'm sure we're going to have more, so that wouldn't make sense to do that. Now the Packers, that's the defense I'd want to get, but if we plug the Packers defense in, it's just not that feasible because we only have $4,500 left per player, which again, we could make it work, but I still want to get a couple more guys in because if I throw in a guy like maybe Chris Godwin, I don't know, it's just not the lineup I want, the lineup construction I really am looking for. So we're going to plug in the Bucks here. So we have $4,800 left per player. So I said in my picks video, if you happen to watch that, I do like Chris Godwin quite a bit, and Antonio Brown was questionable when I made that video. He is now out, so it's definitely going to be a bump in targets for guys like Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. We should also see Scotty Miller and Tyler Johnson being more involved as well. I think they're fine punt plays, but not guys I'm like just rushing to absolutely lock into my lineup. I know they're cheap, but really only if I had to go absolutely dumpster diving here. We really want to go with the stars and scrubs lineup, but since Antonio Brown is out, I do like Chris Godwin here quite a bit. He should push for double-digit targets, and he should avoid Jaire Alexander for the most part because Chris Godwin plays the majority of his snaps in the slot, and Jaire Alexander has played less than 5% of the snaps this season inside the slot, so I imagine he's going to be glued on Mike Evans for the majority of the game, so Chris Godwin could see some softer coverage, and I would not be surprised if he has a pretty solid game. And at $5,400, he should easily be able to pay off that price point, especially with Antonio Brown off the field. So we're going to plug him in. I imagine he's going to be one of the more popular wide receivers on the slate, but I definitely think it's deserved at that price point. So we still have $4,500 left per player, and since we have Josh Allen, it would definitely make sense to want to use some of these cheap Bills pass catching options, and really we could probably play both. Now we would have some salary remaining, so maybe if we can upgrade our defense to the Packers, I would definitely want to do that, but we'll have to make sure and see if it works first. But I like John Brown. I also like Cole Beasley, but we could just play both. I don't think we're going to be able to fit a Mike Evans in. If we do that, we'd have $3,200 left. I don't think Tyler Johnson might be in there. Yeah, he actually is. So if you want to play Tyler Johnson, you could do that at $3,000, but then you'd have 3 Tampa Bay Buccaneers pass catching options, which I don't absolutely love. So since we have Josh Allen, let's just plug in both the pass catching options for him. I know we'd have Allen, Singletary, Diggs, Brown, and Cole Beasley, but on such a small slate, I mean, if Josh Allen happens to go off, I want all the pieces there, and I do believe in the Bills' offense here in this game. And then we'd be running it back with Travis Kelce as well, so that actually would not be a bad lineup, especially correlation-wise. So we'll plug both of these guys in. John Brown here at $4,300 now. It's been a tricky. I haven't had much success rostering these two guys the past 2 weeks because I forget which week it was, but I rostered John Brown. He's one of my favorite plays on the slate. I believe he was like $4,500. He was like 67% owned. He got a goose egg. Cole Beasley ended up having a pretty decent game. Then the next week, I played Cole Beasley over John Brown. Cole Beasley gets a 0, and John Brown ends up having actually a pretty solid game. So we're just going to GM in both these guys here. I know there's $600 remaining, but I actually don't think that's a bad lineup. So you'd have Josh Allen, Aaron Jones, Devin Singletary, Stephon Diggs, Chris Godwin, Cole Beasley, Travis Kelce. John Brown, and the Buccaneers defense. I'm not sure if we can upgrade Singletary to anything. Well, I guess we could. So if you don't want to go with Singletary here and you want to plug in Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I know he's currently questionable. I do have concerns of what the workload could look like. I think we could see more Darrell Williams than we'd like to if we do roster Clyde Edwards-Helaire, but he is cheap. The Chiefs have the highest implied team total on the slate. The Bills' run defense, kind of more so mid-pack, but he's going to be involved in the passing game as well. So if you want to just get rid of Singletary since we have the Bills' passing attack. And I know he's going to get a couple of targets, but he's not going to be a monster, like a huge factor in the passing game. So I actually think this lineup could even look a little bit better here with Allen, Jones, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and then the rest of these guys. So it's really whatever you would prefer. Now, if we want to, one thing I was looking at is instead of playing Travis Kelce, maybe we could spend up for Devante Adams, because I know a lot of people are probably going to have the dilemma of either paying up for Devante Adams or Travis Kelce because they're the same exact price point. So if we happen to do that, we'd obviously have to get rid of Travis Kelce. So I'm going to play with a couple of things here. We'll keep Singletary in there for the moment, and if we can upgrade, we can always do that. So let's just take the wide receivers out. And obviously, I still want Stephon Diggs, so I still have Josh Allen. So let's plug in Devante Adams here now. We haven't talked about him yet. Now, his worst game of the year, where he played a full game, not counting that 1 week versus Detroit, where he had a hamstring injury, didn't play in the second half, ended up missing the next couple of weeks. But his worst game of the season was versus Tampa Bay, where he had 12.1 fantasy points, did not get into the end zone, only had 61 yards, 10 targets, 6 catches. I mean, it wasn't an awful game. It's not something we're used to from Devante Adams, but the guy's been an absolute machine this season, about a 30-some% target share. The guy, I mean, he's just an absolute beast, about the most consistent wide receiver in the league, really only behind Stephon Diggs, although he's definitely had some monster games this year. But it's actually a pretty good matchup here versus the Buccaneers as a wide receiver. They're allowing close to 200 receiving yards per game just to the wide receiver position. They're also bottom 10 in the league versus wide receivers. So I definitely like Devante Adams here, even though I have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense in my lineup. So since we got rid of Travis Kelce for Devante Adams, we're going to have to go cheap at the tight end spot. And if we're going cheap, Robert Tonyan would be my favorite cheap tight end. Now, we could also use Dawson Knox, and we do have Josh Allen, so maybe it would make a little bit more sense to use Dawson Knox. But I'm still going to have quite a few pass-catching options from the Bills here, so I don't think we absolutely have to go that low. Although the Chiefs have struggled versus tight ends this season. They're about bottom 5 in the league versus tight ends, and Knox is always good for a handful of targets. I know he only had 2 last week and 3 before that, but 8, 4, 4. I mean, he should be good for around 3 to 8 targets, which is not that bad at $2,800. And if he gets to the end zone, he's definitely going to be a pretty decent pump play. Not sure we have to go that cheap. And I would prefer getting to Robert Tonyan here. The Buccaneers are also bottom 10 versus tight ends this season, and the guy seems to score almost every single week. I know that's not actually the case, but I mean, there was a nice stretch of him scoring a touchdown each and every single week. I mean, if you're looking at this when I'm scrolling through, but I mean, the floor is a little bit low, but I feel like he has a decent chance of getting close to double-digit points. So we'll plug him in here at $3,600. And then I'd still like to play Chris Godwin, so we're going to plug in Godwin. That would give us $5,400 left per player, or $5,400 left for the remaining player, which I know Leonard Fournette here at $5,300. I don't mind that at all. It's actually a pretty good matchup versus the Packers. They have a pretty good pass defense, but they have one of the worst run defenses in the NFL. I believe they're allowing the 5th most points per game to the running back position. I know Ronald Jones is going to eat into his workload a little bit, but Jones still at around 15 touches last week, and Fournette still at 17 carries and 6 targets, and good for 21.7 fantasy points. And he's been pretty good in the playoffs so far. He's gotten into the end zone, whether it's been on the ground or through the air. And if you do believe the Buccaneers are trailing in this game, you should get quite a few dump offs. And I mean, so far in the playoffs, he's had 10 total targets, so $5,300 on a decent matchup. I don't mind plugging him in. I actually don't think that's a bad build either. So you'd have Josh Allen, Aaron Jones, Singletary, Stephon Diggs, Devante Adams, Chris Godwin, Robert Tonyan, Leonard Fournette in the Buccaneers defense. Now, I do want to do a Patrick Mahomes build, which should look a little bit different, because if I'm using Patrick Mahomes, I definitely want to try to get Tyreek Hill in there as well, in addition to Travis Kelce, because it just makes sense correlation-wise. All right, so we'll put Mahomes in here. I really don't think we have to go over the numbers. He's averaging over 300 passing yards per game this year, throwing the ball nearly 40 times per game. I know some of you might have concerns about the concussion, but he did return to practice. He got cleared. He's good to go as of right now. So this game should be a shootout. They have the highest implied team total on the slate. The Buffalo Bills have struggled versus quarterbacks this season. Overall, a pretty decent pass defense, 12th DVA versus the pass this year, but they really have struggled versus quarterbacks. So, I mean, arguably the best quarterback in football. I mean, we'll just plug him in here. I don't really think I have to think too hard about it. And if we're using Patrick Mahomes, like I said, I want to get Tyreek Hill in. We did not use him in any of the lineups prior to that. But since we have Mahomes, it just makes sense to get his number 1 guy. Well, 1B to Travis Kelce. 1A, 1B, they switch some games, but both those guys are absolutely elite talents. And last week versus Cleveland, 10 targets, 8 catches, got over 100 yards, had the game-sealing catch on 4th down, which crushed my soul as a Browns fan. I was just happy that game was close, really. But the guy's been phenomenal all season long, pretty much double-digit points nearly every single week. Now, if you're looking back at that Week 6 game versus Buffalo, it was actually his worst game of the year. 5.5 points, only had 3 targets, 20 yards. A very weird game for Tyreek Hill. I have a hard time seeing that happen again, and he's actually $800 cheaper than Travis Kelce. I mean, I feel like for quite some time he's been way more expensive than Travis Kelce. Sometimes it's not been drastic, but I remember to close the season, I mean, Tyreek Hill was getting around $9,000 actually if I pull that back up. Yeah, 9,000, 800, 8,500. He was more expensive than Travis Kelce. That has flipped this week. So I actually think he's a pretty decent value here. And matchup's a little bit tough here versus the Bills. They're allowing, I think, the 10th. They're inside the top 10 in fewest points allowed per game to the wide receiver position. Obviously, you have Tre'Davious White, who's an excellent corner, so maybe a little bit concerns there, but it's still Tyreek Hill. He can burn a defense on any given play. If there happens to be a broken play, decent chance he can get into the end zone, 80-yard touchdown, something like that. And obviously, we'd want Travis Kelce in there as well. So it's a little bit of an expensive stack, definitely pretty much the most expensive stack you can make, but it shouldn't be that hard to fit on the slate as the pricing is quite soft. So now we're going to need some running backs. Now, I would like Aaron Jones here, but since he's $6,500, we already have a pretty expensive stack going on. Not sure it's going to be the most feasible thing in the world. Yeah, we could use some absolute pump plays, but just to make this lineup a little bit more balanced, since this is kind of more so focused on cash games. I know this is a stack, but I mean, it's only a 3-man stack. It's nothing too crazy here. And plus, it's a 2-game slate, so we got to do some things that might be a little bit uncomfortable, though this is not uncomfortable by any means. But anyway, let's just go down a little bit here to Leonard Fournette. I already talked about him, but just to save some dough, we're going to plug him in. He should get around 20 total touches, a good matchup versus Green Bay. Don't mind doing that. That gives us $4,300 left per player instead of what Aaron Jones was right around $4,000. Yeah, $4,100. I know it doesn't seem like a lot, but the savings are nice there. And then Singletary, just kind of the guy I fall back on when you evaluate the running back position. He's just too cheap. He's going to grade out well in projections. He does grade out well in mine, so he's going to probably be pretty highly owned, and he's definitely going to be in my cash game lineup more likely than not. So we still have about $4,300 left per player. Now, I'd love to get Devante Adams here. I'd like to get Stephon Diggs, although I think I can get Stephon Diggs, because keep in mind, he's about $1,000 cheaper than Devante Adams. If I'm stacking the Chiefs, I obviously want some run back options, and there's no better run back option than Stephon Diggs here. So we'll plug him in. Hopefully it'll fit. That gives us $3,400 left per player, which if we use a cheap defense, so we'll plug in the Buccaneers again, that gives us $3,800 left, and before that it was at what? Or 34, so it wasn't really too much of a big difference there, about $400 per player. We're now at about $3,800 left per player, so I was actually thinking we could do a double tight end lineup here, because I do like Robert Tonyan. I think he can get into the end zone versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Not saying it's an absolute must that we have to play him here, but we're running a bit of a money here. I would like to play, I don't know if we're going to be able to fit Chris Godwin in. I don't think it's going to be able to work. I'll try to plug him in here. That's $2,300. That's just not going to work unless we happen to go down Stephon Diggs. But I don't really think it's worth going down from Stephon Diggs to be able to fit Chris Godwin in. So we might have to use a cheap Bills pass catching option, which is totally fine by me because I do like those guys, and it just makes it more of a run back in this lineup if we are stacking the Chiefs. So we could either go with John Brown or Cole Beasley. Just for the purpose of this, we'll plug in Cole Beasley. If we have enough money for John Brown, we can do that, but I think Beasley's more of a safer option. John Brown definitely has a bit more upside, but I still feel like Beasley's a bit safer. I mean, he's more the possession wide receiver. John Brown's more of a burner. I believe Beasley's ADOT this season that's 7 or 8, and John Brown's above 12. So now we need our flex, and I think Robert Tonyan is exactly $3,600. So if we want to even out our lineup, I don't think that's the worst idea in the world. I know some of you might want to use Scotty Miller with Antonio Brown being out. I think that's fine as well. I believe he's what, $3,400. Yeah, $3,400. You could go that route as well. He might have a decent game, especially if all the attention's on Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. He could be the forgotten guy. Or if you want to get crazy, you could always go with Tyler Johnson as well. But for right now, we'll plug in Robert Tonyan. I don't think that's a bad lineup. You got Patrick Mahomes, Leonard Fournette, Devin Singletary, Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, Cole Beasley, Travis Kelce, Robert Tonyan to make that double tight end lineup work. And then we have the Buccaneers defense, which I don't love, but again, they fit the lineups, and it just makes the most sense in the slate in my opinion. So think it's going to be it for this video, guys. I hope it was helpful, and if it was, make sure you leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out, and I really do appreciate it. Again, don't copy these lineups, guys. I made them on the fly. I'm sure these will change by game time when I submit my own lineups, but this is just a general direction of where you might want to go heading into the slate. But yeah, I think it's going to be it. Hope you guys enjoy the games. And our predictions for the Super Bowl is going to be the Bills and the Packers. I am rooting for the Bills to win because, I'm a Browns fan. We have that Lake Erie Alliance. But I still think it's going to be the Packers and the Chiefs. If you guys want to let me know in the comments down below who you think is going to the Super Bowl, you can let me know. But that is my prediction. And I'll see you guys in the next video.